Hey, did you know that in the summer of 1971, a group of college students walked into a fake prison in a basement in California, and within days it completely changed a few of them? Within less than a week, ordinary young men were forcing other young men to do push-ups as part of punishment, stripping them naked as humiliation, and waking them up in the middle of the night just to break their spirits. And the most disturbing part? Nobody made them do it. They just did it. This was a psychology experiment at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And what it revealed about human nature was so unsettling that people are still arguing about it more than 50 years later. This is the story of the Stanford prison experiment. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of Hey Did You Know, where we dig up the weird, the forgotten, and the downright strange corners of America. Quick reminder for anybody who's brand new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell because you're not going to want to miss any other episode that we have coming out. We release new stories every other Wednesday, and don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts because I love hearing what you all have to think. But for now, let's dive in and take a trip back to the 1970s. It's the 1970s, and America is in chaos. The Vietnam War is tearing the country apart. Protests are erupting on college campuses, and the news was full of stories of atrocities. People kept asking the same exact question. How does this happen? How do ordinary people end up doing terrible things? One man became almost obsessed with that question. His name? Philip Zimbardo, a psychology professor at Stanford University in California. Zimbardo had spent years studying human behavior, and he had a theory. He believed that situational forces, the environment around the person or the role that they're placed in, could be more powerful than individual character or morality. In other words, he believed that the situation makes the person, not the other way around. And he wanted to prove it. So, in the summer of 1971, Zimbardo designed an experiment. He would build a fake prison and take ordinary, psychologically healthy young men and randomly assign them to one of two roles. Some would be prisoners, and others would be guards. And then he would just watch to see what happened. And in doing so, he had no idea what he was about to unleash. Zimbardo advertised in local newspapers, offering $15 a day, a decent wage in 1971, to young men willing to participate in a 2-week study on prison life. 75 men applied, and each one was put through a rigorous screening process, psychological tests, background checks, in-depth interviews. Zimbardo and his team were looking for a very specific type of candidate. No criminal history, no psychological impairments, and no medical problems. In the end, 24 men were chosen. Half were randomly assigned to guards and the other half to prisoners. And to make the experiment feel real from the very beginning, Zimbardo arranged something extraordinary for the first day of the experiment. On the morning of Sunday, August 15th, local police officers showed up at the homes of the students assigned to be prisoners. They arrested them, handcuffed them on their front lawns in front of their neighbors, read them their rights, and put them in the back of the police cars. Then, the young men were booked at a real police station, fingerprinted, blindfolded, and driven to Stanford University, to the basement of the psychology building, which had been converted into a mock prison. When the blindfolds came off, they were inside a corridor of cells with bars on the doors. Their real clothes were taken away, and they were given smocks to wear without any underwear, and a chain was bolted around one ankle. Each prisoner was assigned a number, and from that point on, guards were instructed to never use their names, in a way to dehumanize the prisoners. The guards, meanwhile, were given uniforms, khaki shirts, silver reflective sunglasses so the prisoners couldn't see their eyes, and wooden batons, which they were told they could only use for psychological intimidation, not for physical harm. Zimbardo himself also took on a role and became the prison superintendent. And then, the doors closed. Day 2 arrived after a full day of everyone getting used to their new lives. At 2:30 in the morning, the prisoners were woken up by the sound of the guards blowing their whistles and rattling their batons against the bars. So in an effort to reassert their independence, the prisoners barricaded themselves inside their cells, ripped off their prisoner numbers, and tore off their stocking caps and refused to come out. This, of course, caught the research staff off guard, especially after such a smooth and uneventful first day. When the morning guards arrived, they blamed the night shift for being too lenient. Forced to handle rebellion themselves, their response quickly became something research staff watched with intense interest. Now, let's remember, these were just college students, average young men who had been handed a uniform and told to maintain order. No training, no manual, no experience. So what did they do? They improvised. They broke into the barricaded cells and blasted the prisoners with fire extinguishers, stripped them of their clothes, took away their mattresses, and threw the main instigators into a solitary confinement. They then decided they needed to find a way to cut off further acts of disobedience, so they divided the prisoners into two groups, those who led the revolt and those who hadn't. The good prisoners were moved into a separate cell designated as the privileged cell. There, they were given back their clothes and their beds. The guards then began to mix the groups, taking some of the good prisoners and placing them back into the bad cells, while moving some of the bad prisoners into the good cell, which of course confused everybody. Some of the ringleaders began to suspect that those that had been in the privileged cells before were informers, and just like that, distrust started to spread amongst the prisoners. This tactic closely mirrored strategies used in real prisons by real prison guards to break prisoner alliances. In actual prisons, divisions such as racial tensions between African Americans or Hispanic and white inmates are often exploited to keep prisoners at odds with each other. Encouraging aggression among prisoners effectively redirects it away from themselves. From that point on, the guards leaned into their power, forcing them to do push-ups on a whim, and when guards decided a prisoner had misbehaved, bathroom privileges were revoked entirely, leaving inmates with nothing but a bucket in their cells. It was around this time that one prisoner began to unravel. Prisoner number 8612 started showing signs of distress, uncontrollable crying, and bursts of rage, but by then, even much of the research staff had become so immersed in the prison authority roles that they had believed he was faking it. He was even scolded by the experiment's prison consultant for being weak and was offered a deal, become an informant in exchange for relief from guard harassment. During the next head count, prisoner 8612 told the others, quote, "You can't leave and you can't quit," which sent a chilling message that deepened the sense of real imprisonment. Not long after, he began to spiral further, screaming, cursing, and flying into what seemed like an uncontrollable rage. It took far too long for anyone to realize that he was genuinely suffering. And ultimately, he became the first prisoner to be released from the experiment. After everything that had unfolded over the past few days, a visiting hour was held for parents and friends. But Zimbardo worried that if parents saw the true state of the prison, they might demand to take their sons home. So, much like a real prison might, they carefully staged the environment to appear far more pleasant than it was. The prisoners were washed and shaved and groomed, and their cells were cleaned and polished. They were given a large meal, music played over the intercom, and an attractive former Stanford cheerleader was even brought in to greet visitors at the registration desk. When visitors arrived, the experiment seemed novel, even fun, but they weren't free from the prison's rule themselves. They had to register, wait a half an hour, were told that only 2 visitors could see a prisoner at a time, and were limited to just 10 minutes under the watchful eye of a guard. Of course, some parents complained, but in the end, they still went along with it. Although a few of the parents did become upset when they saw how fatigued and distressed their sons were. Their concerns were often redirected. One mother approached Zimbardo, saying that she had never seen her son look so bad. His response? He shifted the focus away from the situation and onto her son, asking, quote, "What's the matter with your boy? Doesn't he sleep well?" He then turned to the father and asked, "Don't you think your boy can handle this?" The father replied, "Of course he can. He's a real tough kid." And with that, the visit ended. Following the end of visiting hours, a guard overheard prisoners talking about an escape plan. The rumor was that prisoner 8612, who had been released the night before, was going to return with his friends and break in to free everybody. Rather than investigate the source of the rumor, Zimbardo and his guards focused on protecting the prison and preventing any escape. After meeting with the warden, superintendent, and the chief lieutenant, Zimbardo decided to bring in additional guards, chain the prisoners together, place bags over their head, and move them to a fifth-floor storage room until after the anticipated break-in. The plan was that when the would-be rescuers arrived, he would be there to tell them all the experiment was over, and that all the prisoners had already been sent home, leaving them nothing to liberate. They even briefly considered luring 8612 back under false pretenses, only to imprison him again. When the time came, Zimbardo sat there alone, and no intruders ever arrived. The only person to show up was his colleague Gordon Bauer, who had heard about the experiment, and when he asked Zimbardo what the independent variable in this study was, Zimbardo found himself reacting with unexpected anger. It was a moment that unsettled even him. It was clear that he was no longer thinking like a research psychologist, but truly like a prison superintendent. After spending an entire day preparing for something that never came, of course, someone had to pay. The frustrated guards escalated their harassment once again, forcing the prisoners into menial, repetitive tasks such as cleaning toilet bowls with their bare hands, doing push-ups, jumping jacks, truly whatever the guards could come up with. On the fifth day, Zimbardo invited a Catholic priest who had experience as a prison chaplain to evaluate how realistic the situation had become. As the chaplain interviewed the prisoners, he was struck by the fact that most of them had introduced themselves by number rather than name. One prisoner, 819, initially refused to speak with him. He was feeling sick, he had stopped eating, and insisted on seeing a doctor instead. Eventually, he was persuaded to come out so they could assess what kind of help he really needed. And while speaking with the priest and Zimbardo, he broke down completely, crying hysterically. His chain was removed and his cap was taken off, and he was allowed to rest in a nearby room. Meanwhile, a guard lined up the other prisoners and had them chant very loud against him.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Hearing this, Zimbardo rushed back and found 819 sobbing uncontrollably. In that moment, he finally broke character and told him, "This isn't a real prison. This is just an experiment. And those are students, just like you." Strangely, the effect was immediate. The prisoner stopped crying, looked up like a child waking up from a nightmare, and quietly said, "Okay, let's go." At this point, it became clear that the study had to end. What had been created was an overwhelmingly powerful situation. Prisoners were withdrawing and exhibiting troubling behavior, while some guards had begun acting in openly sadistic ways, and notably, not a single guard had chose to quit during the experiment. In fact, none showed up late, called in sick, left early, or even asked for extra pay for the overtime they were putting in. Zimbardo ultimately decided to end the experiment for two key reasons. First, the research team had discovered through videotapes that the guards were escalating their abuse during the night, when they believed no one was watching and the experiment was, quote, off. Their boredom had driven them to even do more degrading and disturbing behavior. Second, Christina Maslock, a recent Stanford PhD graduate, brought in to conduct interviews, strongly objected to what she had saw. Witnessing prisoners being marched to the bathroom with bags on their heads, legs chained together, and hands on each other's shoulders, she was outraged. Quote, "It's terrible what you're doing to these boys," she said. Out of more than 50 outsiders who had observed the prison, she was the only one to seriously question its morality. And so, after only 6 days, the planned 2-week simulation was called off, bringing the prison Stanford experiment to an end. The Stanford prison experiment went on to become one of the most famous psychological studies in history, featured in textbooks, documentaries, and films. Zimbardo argued that it supported his central theory, that ordinary people can be transformed by the situations they're placed in, and that evil isn't simply something you're born with. But the experiment has also faced significant criticism. Some researchers question whether the guards were truly acting on their own, or if they had been subtly encouraged by Zimbardo and his team to behave aggressively. Others pointed to the idea of demand characteristics, that participants may have interpreted the purpose of the experiment and unconsciously adjusted their behaviors to fit those expectations. Decades later, in 2004, the experiment became relevant again during the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq. Zimbardo was troubled by officials blaming the abuse on, quote, a few bad apples, rather than acknowledging potential systematic issues within the prison system itself. He later joined the defense team for one of the guards, gaining full access to the investigation reports and testifying as an expert witness. From that experience, he wrote The Lucifer Effect, understanding how good people turn evil, drawing clear parallels between the Stanford experiment and events at Abu Ghraib. I also want to note one final thing. Just a year after the experiment ended, Zimbardo married Christina Maslock, the very woman who challenged him and helped him bring the study to an early stop. They went on to have 2 children and remained together for 52 years until his passing in 2024. So, in every episode, I want to leave you with a question, and this one might be probably the most important one I've ever asked. I want to know, do you believe Zimbardo's theory is true? Are people really shaped by the situations they're placed in? Or were the guards simply acting in the way that they thought they were expected to? And one more thing. Do you think the experiment should have been stopped sooner? Let me know in the comments. I really want to know what you guys think about this one. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, and don't forget to follow, because you're not going to want to miss what we have coming up. Because next time, we're stepping into one of the darkest spectacles in American history. We're going to St. Louis, Missouri in 1904, where millions gathered to celebrate progress, innovation, and the future, while human beings from around the world were being displayed like attractions behind fences and stages for the public to stare at. What was called education and entertainment at the time would later be remembered as something far more disturbing. Until next time, thanks for listening.